But don't think of it as something that's impossible or hard to do. If you think of what I'm about to tell you as something that's difficult, cumbersome, time-consuming, and extra constraint, sets your standards higher, makes things harder, you're misunderstanding what I'm trying to tell you, right? I'd be wasting your time for the next hour if I'm making your work harder, right? So you have to try to understand what I'm saying in a way that makes your work easier, right? That is definitely a key thing. So I'm going to do like a 3-minute recap just to remind you of what I expect you are probably doing, right? You are making a text. It could be as little as 30 pages or 40 pages. It could be up to 60, 80 pages. One of the things that's really important to keep in mind is that pages doesn't tell you very much about what you're trying to do. So the thing you're trying to polish now isn't a bunch of words on a bunch of pages and you're trying to polish them and make them shiny, right? If you try to work on the pages, you're going to be doing this wrong. The thing you have to be thinking about is the paragraphs you've written. And so a text of, say, 100 pages will probably have between 150 and 200 paragraphs, right? Each of those paragraphs, and this is the important thing to keep in mind for your final revision, each of the paragraphs will say one thing you know. In a well-formed prose presentation, you are making a series of paragraphs. Each of these paragraphs say one thing you know to be true. And they should be then written with an eye to what is the difficulty that the reader faces with that one thing. So if I was to say the one thing that the paragraph says in a single sentence, we call this the key sentence. If I say this and then I imagine my reader, then I think, will the reader find this hard to believe, hard to agree with, right, or hard to understand? And if the reader finds it hard to believe, I have to give evidence. I have to support it. If the reader finds it hard to understand, I have to elaborate my meaning. I have to define my terms or whatever. And if the reader finds it hard to agree with, which is possible, then I have to defend it, right? Which is to say I have to engage with their objections, the reader's objections. Does that make sense? So we're talking about perfecting, finishing, which is all perfecting really means. It just means finishing, right? It doesn't mean making it perfect. It just means finishing it so that you can submit it. 150 to 200 items, units, these are paragraphs, each of which has a key sentence, the one thing that it says. And you can immediately see how this can help you in your revision process because you can make a list. If I ask you, how many things do you have to know to write a year-end project? You can answer by just counting the amount of paragraphs that fill up those pages. How many things do you know? You know 100 things. You know 150 things. You know 200 things, right? Each of them is articulated in a sentence, a simple declarative sentence. And for each of them, I can ask you, should I find that hard to believe, hard to understand, or hard to agree with? And in each of those cases, you can offer me evidence, explanation, or a defense. Right? Does that make sense? That is the basic structure of what we're trying to do. Now, when you are thinking about revising your text, you should really think about how much time you have. Right? That's probably the first thing you should do. And never say, I have 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. That is way too vague. I want to know how many hours you have. And the best thing you can do here is to be kind to yourselves, which is also a way of being kind to your reader, right? Make sure that you give yourself 3, max 4 hours of intensive revision time every day, right? But at most, I'm not saying you have to give yourself 3 or 4 hours. I'm saying give yourself at most 3 or 4 hours, right? Does that make sense? You seem very puzzled?
I was just thinking, why not more?
Because what's going to happen is the last, even the 5th hour, is going to be not effective. What's going to happen is you need a certain amount of time over the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, all right? And you want to make sure the hours you do spend doing it are effective. So you're not introducing more mistakes than you're removing, right? You want to make sure you're concentrating right? And you're working in a deliberate way, right? So it seems like not very much time, but if you really concentrate, it's better spent than if you spend the whole day trying, right? Most people who say I was working on my dissertation all day were not working on their dissertation all day, right? They were doing a lot of other things that could arguably be said to somehow involve their dissertation, but they were not doing deliberate tasks that improved their dissertation. So planning is key, right? Here's a thing I want you to do when you think about this. Think about your reader, right? And we'll get back to exactly who you should be thinking about your reader as. But think about your reader as engaged in an activity. And that activity, is, of course, reading your text. And that takes time. It proceeds in time, right? The very first paragraph is the very first minute of your reader's attention, right? It's a minute you spend with your reader. And the next paragraph is the next minute of your reader's attention, and so forth. 150 paragraphs is 150 minutes of your reader's attention, right? And you should be thinking about your text from that point of view. Every time you have about a half a page, which is about a paragraph, about half a page, right? You should be thinking, here's a minute of my reader's time. Did I spend it wisely, right? Did the reader appreciate what I did? And that's where your own planning comes in, because imagine the following proportion: 27, 9, 1. The 1 represents your reader's 1 minute of effort reading the paragraph. The 27 minutes represents the reasonable amount of time that you can be expected as a writer to be working on that one paragraph, right? So think of your reader. Your reader is looking at this half a page, and imagine your reader asking yourself, does it look like it took 27 minutes to write this thing, right? Does this seem like something that somebody cared for deliberately for 27 minutes, right? That is a good test of whether or not it's working. What you should be doing is reading it out loud to find out. You read it out loud, you look at it, you look at that paragraph, you say, does it seem like something, like I'm asking the reader to do something with this for a minute, am I being reasonable about that, right? And does it seem like I spent 27 minutes writing it? The 9 represents what happened when you gave this to either the person you're writing with, the partner in your group, or the thing that happened when you gave it just to not a stranger, but like a fellow student. Should be somebody in the same discipline, working in the same problem, and working at the same level, right? You give this thing to your fellow student, and they read it out loud to you. That takes about a minute, and then they spend a little bit of time they spend the rest of the 9 minutes just giving you feedback. And the only thing you did for those 9 minutes was listen, right? So what we're trying to do, and you don't have to do this for every paragraph you write and every paragraph you submit, but it sets a standard. It tells you, right, what good writing is in a very concrete way by saying, does this minute of reading experience look like somebody tried to make it for me in 27 minutes? And does it look like somebody else already gave feedback for 9 minutes on this text, right? Does it feel like it's survived 9 minutes of direct feedback where I just sat and listened, right? That's a good standard to work with. That sets your framework. The other thing it does, and this is an important thing, right? Let's say you have a final text, right? You now know something about how much your revision process is going to take. Because what you want to do ideally is spend about 9 or 10 minutes per paragraph, right? So in a 100 paragraph text, about 500 minutes, right? 500 minutes working on that, right? So you divide by 60, we're well under 10 hours. We're well under 10 hours. Does that make sense? Where this thing has been read through carefully. You want to be able to finish the following sentence. It's something I always ask when people are struggling with their writing, is I ask, can you finish the sentence? This project shows that. Right? Can you finish that sentence? If you have finished your data collection and you're working on your analysis, at some point that conclusion will fall into place, right? You want that conclusion to fall into place very soon if you've only got 2 weeks left, right? You want to make sure that's what you're working towards, is a text that shows this. So, first step, read what you've got. So everything at this point, what you should be doing is reading everything you have and summarizing it in the key sentences that go with each paragraph, right? And there's a simple procedure for that. What I would suggest you do is, if you are working with a partner, if you're working alone, then do this alone. But if you're working with a partner, right, give the paragraphs you wrote to the partner and take their paragraphs and look at yourself. That's the first exchange you do. Now you read them through, and for each paragraph, you choose, you don't write, you choose the key sentence, which is to say you assume that the one thing this paragraph says is a sentence in the paragraph, right? If you say, all I'm allowed to do is point at the paragraph, that's all I'm allowed to do, what sentence would I choose? Now you make a list of all of those, right? We call this the post hoc or after the fact outline, right? It's a nice thing to have. And what you want to do is number those paragraphs, right? So you number the key sentences and you number the paragraphs. And if you have a numbered list of key sentences and a numbered list of paragraphs, and those numbers are not dynamic numbers in Word, right? You want to make sure that they are stable after you've made this list, right? They are the number that they are, right? Because you want to make sure that you can index them to each other, and when you move them around, there's no problem. Now you fix them, right? You take those key sentences and you make sure that if you just read them in order, one after the other, that your argument makes sense. You just say, look, if I say this, and then I say this, and then I say this, and then I say this, it's easy to see what the line of argument is. Now, each of those things will lack evidence or explanation or some kind of defense, because you've removed the paragraph that's supposed to do that work. So what you're doing is you're assuming that you're writing paragraph for paragraph, your writing is successful. So if you assume that, then you can start fixing those sentences so they say exactly what you want to say. One of the things you'll notice is that sentence 17 contradicts sentence 27. Sentence 13 says exactly what sentence 95 says. It'll become much more obvious that you're repeating yourself or you're contradicting yourself. That'll become a much easier thing to see, because the key sentences are saying basically the same thing or basically the opposite thing. And obviously you have a choice to make, right? Do I want to repeat myself? That's fine. Do you know this very famous line from Walt Whitman? He says, do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. Right? I contain multitudes. I don't recommend you contradict yourself, right? But if you do reach contradictory conclusions or conclusions that are in some kind of tension with each other, that may simply be something you need to acknowledge in your discussion section, right? It may be that you reach contradictory conclusions. Your reader will notice at some point, hey, you just said this, and it seems to me like 20 paragraphs back you said the opposite. What's going on here, right? If you come back to that at some point and acknowledge that contradiction, you're doing the work of writing, right? So you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You're not, the other thing, of course, is to resolve the contradiction, realizing, oops, I just taught myself that I was wrong in paragraph 17, and what I said in paragraph 36 is actually right. Does that make sense? But the way you get this overview of your argument is by making sure you're not working with hundreds of pages, but with 100 sentences, right? You've got 100 sentences, and these are the claims you're making. Notice that if you're working this way with your text, you will be way, way better prepared for the oral defense of your text as well, right? So when you have to step up and defend your text, you know exactly what you're saying, right? You know what claims you've made, you know what sorts of things you're going to be asked questions about, right? Because you have this summary list of sentences. There's an important part of your text called the reference list. There are actually examiners that will look at that first, and just make sure that the texts you're citing are the sorts of texts that we would want you to cite in this particular program, in this particular course. So make that list and make it early. Make it now. Don't leave it to the end. Make sure that your bibliography is a thing that a physical object that you can look at and admire with pride. These are all the things I've read. There's lots of them. There's enough of them. Let's put it that way. There's enough of them. And then, of course, what you have to make sure is all of them are actually referenced in your text. Right? You have to go back into your text and make sure that these are actually correlated with something that happens in the text. And make sure that you're getting those references right. So that's a definite part of the revision process. Remember something here, and that is that what you're doing is you're saying, I'm participating in a conversation. And it's part of the quality of your work, is to participate in that conversation. So we've got list of key sentences, list of references. I think you know what can happen now. What you can do is you can say, all right, I've got 100 key sentences, forget about the paragraphs for now, 100 key sentences, and now I'm also going to add, under each of those, I'm going to add my sources. So I've got just the key sentences and the sources I'm using in that paragraph, and the reference list. And we want to make sure that every source I use in a paragraph is in the reference list. I've got an overview of everything I'm saying and everything I'm basing that on as far as my reading goes. That's the after the fact outline, sort of completed. I know what I'm saying, I know what I'm basing it on, and I know I've got my reference list complete. I also know that I've got at least a first draft, maybe it's a second draft, right? I've got a version of every paragraph I need. I have filled in the holes into my argument. So here's something that can happen, right? I can repeat myself, I can contradict myself, or I can skip a step, right? I can skip a necessary part of the argument. So I'm missing something. How do I fix that? I write the key sentence of the thing I would need to know to fill in that hole in my argument. So to get from here to here, I need to claim this. And so I'm going to write that key sentence. I know I don't have a paragraph for it. And how do I know I don't have a paragraph for it? Well, because it doesn't have a number. It's just a key sentence between this sentence and this sentence, but it's not numbered. So I know I've got to get this thing written. So now I have a list of things, sentences. I might even have moved them around so that they're in a better order. I've got 100 sentences. I've got 20 of them are unnumbered, so they're work to be done. So I've got 120 sentences, 100 sentences plus these 20 new ones. Now I've got work to do. And that's where this number comes in. Because what's 120 divided by 2, which is, say, 27 minutes plus a 3-minute break, 2 paragraphs an hour, 60 hours, 15 hours a week, because 3 hours a day, 20 hours max, because 4 hours max if you really want to push yourself. 4 weeks, 60 hours. In 4 weeks, you can write the entire thing if you plan your work. You can write the entire thing easily, working only 3 hours a day. Some of you have only got 2 weeks. Some of you are working in groups, so you've got ways of dividing this labor up and so forth, right? But just remember that you've got a list of claims you want to make, and you know it's going to take you about 27 minutes plus a 3-minute break to make each of those claims. Right? So you look in your calendar, you realize I don't have 60 hours. I don't have, or the 40 hours I need, or the 20 hours I need, or whatever. I don't have it, right? Well, there's a solution to that problem. One of them is to reduce your ambition. One of them is just to say, well, I've got some of these paragraphs written. I don't need to put those on the list of things to do. They're pretty good, actually, these paragraphs. This paragraph I have to rewrite because it's a terrible paragraph. Right? So I'm going to rewrite this one. This paragraph is outright missing, so I have to write this paragraph. So I make a prioritized list. Another thing you can do, it's also kind of reducing your ambition, is to say, well, 27 minutes is a pretty high standard. Right? It says for every minute of my reader's time, it feels like I spent 27 minutes working on it. I'm going to try 18 minutes. That's 3 paragraphs an hour. Slightly reduced ambition, but still an orderly way of proceeding, of getting through this whole thing. You're still working in a deliberate way to say things and support, elaborate, or defend them. But just make sure that over 2 or 3 or 4 weeks that the last part of your project is running, that you are not in doubt about what you're doing every day. You've made a plan, and all you're doing is sitting down and following that plan, because you know what you have to say and you know what you have to do with it. That's my suggestion to you, is that you work in that way. The trick is that at the end of the day, you decide what you want to say. And it should be at a time like in the afternoon, late afternoon, before dinner. Leave yourself some time to reconstitute, to just relax, right? To be human. Because otherwise, if you spend 3 or 4 weeks only worrying about this one thing, it's going to show. It's going to show in the work, right? So you need to make sure you give yourself some time to relax. At the end of the day, when you've decided I'm not going to get any smarter and my project is not going to get any better today, you pick up to 6 things you're going to say tomorrow and set yourself some times for it, right? So you start at 8 and you'll be done by 11. 3 hours later, you've done your 3 hours of work, right? Now, what will happen is if you have specified these tasks by looking at your after-the-fact outline, or especially if you look at your after-the-fact outline, so you're taking these key sentences out. You can also make up new ones, but I would really say try to work on the ones that you're trying to get through here at the end. You take these key sentences, so you know what you're going to say, you sleep on it, and then you just work for 27 minutes and stop. Right, so you don't set a timer, you just have to look at a clock. At 8 o'clock you start, at 8:27 you stop, you take a 3-minute break, you go on to the next paragraph. No matter how well it went. That's the hard part, right? The reason you're probably, I don't know, but the reason you're probably taking more than 27 minutes is you're letting yourself take more than 27 minutes. So you're going into the writing with a feeling like, I have all day. But if you go into your writing with a feeling like, I have till 11 o'clock and I have 5 other things to do before 11, right? You will limit yourself in time, and it'll sharpen your focus, and you'll be surprised at how much you get done if you know the day before what you're going to say, and you know you're going to stop after 27 minutes. It forces you to get through everything. It's very important, and certainly important in this final revision stage, that you get through everything. You don't get stuck anywhere. You don't let yourself get stuck. You just say, I'm going to give it 27 minutes. That's going to improve it. It's not going to perfect it. It's not going to be the end of it. But I'll do whatever 27 minutes will let me do, and then I'll do another 27 minutes. Is that the situation you're in, or is that, yes, so you're in the situation of you only have 1 week left from now on. You do whatever math is necessary, right? So you may have to break my rules and say, I got to go over 4 hours, right? You may have to go under 18 minutes. You can even do 13-minute paragraphs in your revision process, right? But there's no such thing as working 28 hours. So there's no such thing as going over the physical limits of your day. But what I am suggesting is you make a plan and you never give yourself more than 6 hours of deliberate, intense attention to this project, right? You can, of course, have loose, vague, free-floating worry about the project, right? But plan to do 6 hours of work. And what you'll find is that if you plan and carry out 6 hours of work every day, some of it is reading and planning and thinking and talking with people in your group and so forth, right? Some of it is intense writing and rewriting, right? And try to keep that intense part down to 3 hours, the total to 6 hours, and then make sure you take a break. Get your physical exercise, right? Play your musical instrument, right? See a movie, right? Go for a walk. All of those things will turn into quality in the work you are doing, right? So that's my definite advice to you if you only have a week. Figure out how many hours there are. Make a decision about how much you're going to do every day, and then work in a steady and deliberate fashion. If you haven't written the paragraph yet, certainly 27 minutes is what I would recommend, right? Sit down, you know what the key sentence is, you type that in. Don't spend the time reading. Don't spend the time trying to decide whether or not you're right. You've decided that the day before. Don't spend the time trying to find sources. You should have those ready already the day before, sort of in a pile, so organize your work in a way that makes that possible. What you're doing is spending the time actually physically writing. You'll find that you'll probably write 180 words pretty quick. And then you're rewriting it. You're reading it out loud. You're writing it in alternative ways. You're moving the key sentence from the top of the paragraph to the bottom of the paragraph to the middle, trying to find out where does it fit best and so forth. You're spending time with that paragraph, right? What you're doing is you're creating that satisfaction for the reader, right? Because the reader is going to feel like, oh, the exact perfect solution has been found for this paragraph. Have you seen The Matrix, the movie? The classic science fiction film. The superheroes in this movie have the power, the capacity of slowing down time, mainly because they know it's all an illusion and the whole thing is just a computer simulation, right? Which means they move in real time, the things around them move in slow motion. If you're fighting somebody, you can kind of do that in a casual, relaxed way. You can move out of the way if you get shot, right? The bullet just flies past you. This is called bullet time. What you should be doing is working in bullet time. The 27 minutes is you being 27 times stronger and faster than your reader, right? And you decide what happens, right? This word is going to go into your reader's mind, then this word will go in there, then this word, then there will be a period, then this word, right? Then this reference, right? You're making all those decisions, and you have a luxury of time to make those decisions. So enjoy it. That's a good strategy. The only thing I would push back against is the idea that you're spending the afternoon preparing for tomorrow. You should spend the afternoon just getting smarter, right? So you're reading things and trying to understand them. You're looking at your data and trying to analyze it and make sense of it. You're not trying to solve an intellectual problem that if you don't solve it, you can't write tomorrow, right? And the way we do this is we say, look, there's always going to be a weekend and there's always going to be last week. The thing that you pick here to write about tomorrow is something you knew last week. So your writing process is always focused on things you've known for at least a week. Right? Now that is very useful in thinking about quality of writing as well, because remember, you'll be defending a text a few weeks after you've submitted it. Right? So you don't want to be defending a text where you're like, oh, the day after I wrote this and submitted it, I got so much smarter that I realized it's all nonsense. Right? What you want to do is you want to make sure that you're writing something that you've known for long enough that this is still going to be knowledge by the time you defend it. Right? So just push the knowing back about a week, right? So that you're comfortably knowing. I sometimes say what you're doing is trying to write and edit from the center of your strength. The problem of knowing has been solved. So you've got a week left, right? So you don't have to learn anything before you submit. All you have to do is write, right? So always be writing about something that you already know. You're already smart enough to do this, right? You're already knowledgeable enough to do this. All you have to do is enact, manifest, display that knowledge. If this is making it sound harder, you're misunderstanding. Right? All of this is making it easier. There's right? Always a possible key sentence. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you've left it out, right? And sometimes you'll even leave it out in the final analysis, because in the final revision, because you'll say it's just too clumsy to have a thing that says this. But for example, I have identified 6 characteristics. Right? That gives you a way of writing a paragraph that just has one sentence for each characteristic, right? But it's a correct key sentence because it's true. What you're doing is you're elaborating the fact that you have used 6 characteristics, right? So the key sentence is just there are 6 characteristics. Sometimes you'll think, well, all I'm doing is telling a story. All I'm doing is describing my organization, right? Well, the organization was founded in 2007 with 4 employees, right? That might be a key sentence, and then the founding of the organization is what the paragraph is about, right? Or the organization has been active for 20 years, right? Okay, well, now you've got an opportunity to tell a little history of 20 years, right? So that kind of key sentence is always a possibility. You want to avoid having a paragraph where if I ask you, what do you want your reader to take away from this? You say, I don't know. I just want them to read all those sentences. I just want them to read all those words, right? That experience is a negative experience for the reader. Right? The reader should be able to say, that's what he wanted me to believe, right? That's what he wanted me to understand, or that's what he thinks I disagree with him about, right? And remember that if you get into that situation where you think the reader is going to disagree with me about this, so I'm going to defend it. If you get into that situation, don't think you have to solve that disagreement. All you have to do is manage it. Right? You don't have to, the reader doesn't have to stop disagreeing with you. You've just got a paragraph where you're actively just enjoying the fact that we disagree about this, right? This is the thing we're going to disagree about, you and me, dear reader. Right? We now have a good opportunity to talk about who the reader is. Right? And some of you have probably heard me say this before. Who do you imagine your reader is? Exactly. You are writing at eye level. Don't imagine your examiner or your teachers, right? It's natural to think I'm writing this for my teachers, but please avoid doing that. Your teachers are evaluating your ability to communicate with your peers, because all academic writing is writing for peers, right? For people of like mind, with a similar disciplinary background, so a similar reading background, right? Similar theoretical expectations of the objects you're studying, right? And so you're always, what you should be doing is imagining the smartest, most serious, most ambitious, most industrious student in your cohort. It could be you, right? And that's fine. Then just write to yourself or your ideal self or your higher self or whatever, right? But it's easy to imagine somebody that's been through roughly what you've been through at this point. How do I explain what I want to explain in my project to that person, all right? That's the trick. It's also, in many ways, a friendlier reader than you might otherwise imagine, right? You might be imagining you're writing to an authority, right? Please don't do that. Always be writing to an equal, a peer. If you're after the fact outline, when you're going through what's everything we're going to say, and we've also got a reference list, right? Remember, the reference list is the finite list of sources you are going to be allowed to use, right? So, I mean, it can grow slightly as you're working on it. But it's whatever it is, 30 or 40 or 50 or 100, whatever the amount of references you have, right? So just for every paragraph, just also pick some references. That's one of the things that will remind you, what is it? I'm going to say sense making is retrospective. My reference is Weik 1995, page 54, right? It's possible as a reference, yeah? And I can have several references like that for a paragraph. And it's not going to be some crazy list. It's not going to be 104 references. It's going to be 3 or 4 or 7 or something, right? Some manageable amount of references per paragraph. So that's one thing that'll trigger you. But another thing you can do is just write little keywords or little notes to yourself. The trick is not to let this moment last longer than about 10 minutes, right? You don't want to spend the entire afternoon worrying about tomorrow. It's a waste of time. You're only making decisions. And the reason that you want to discipline yourself in that way is if you have a hard time making a quick decision about what I'm going to write about tomorrow and what's my basis for saying that, it's the wrong thing to write about, right? What you want to do is pick something that you know so well that it's going to be easy to remember. And then you're saying, remember until tomorrow. But that's kind of the wrong way of thinking about it. Because what's happening is you're drawing it from a very deep basis, right? So you're not remembering it from today to tomorrow. You're drawing it out of last week, right? So at this moment, you're drawing it out of last week. And tomorrow, you're going to be drawing it out of the same place, right? When you answer this question, which I started with, right? Which is, can you finish the sentence, this project shows that? Make sure that what it shows has theoretical weight, right? So it doesn't show that it's important to think very carefully about strategic decisions, right? Because yes, right? That's common sense, right? Right? But it might show that taking a resource-based view of the organization won't always solve the problems that you need to solve, right? So now we have resource-based views of organizations, right, suddenly become, is a theoretical term that is giving some weight to what we're doing. So just make sure that when you summarize what you're doing, right, it is saying something of practical use, but it has this theoretical import. Right? So when you summarize it, cook it down in one sentence, don't strip the theory out of it, right? But also don't strip the practice out of it. Don't strip the empirical material out of either. Right? So the art of writing that one sentence that brings theory and practice very nicely together, right? Very efficiently together. That's what you really want to be working at. Every day you get up and you do a number of things you planned the day before, and every day you stop doing those things well before you fall asleep, right? You relax, you eat healthy, you do all the things you need to do to take care of yourself, right? You don't forget to brush your teeth, right? It's okay to have an exam beard if you like that kind of thing, right? But you don't, so you don't have to worry about all those things, but do make sure that you stay healthy and get some sleep, right? Why get sleep? Because the lack of dreaming, right, that people stop dreaming, they stop sleeping really very well when they're in their final days. This shows, right? Dreams are actually a quality of writing, right? They're stylistic strength, right? So remember to do that. And the way you do that is quite simple. Tell yourself what you're going to do exactly on the page tomorrow, paragraph by paragraph, key sentence by key sentence. Then think no more of it, relax, sleep, and then go and just do those things, right? What you will find is that your unconscious is helping you, right? You're not destroying your unconscious, you're not exhausting yourself, you're constantly getting stronger. And then what's really happening is that you're training, the entire writing project is a training exercise that is preparing you for that also very important moment of the oral defense, right? When instead of showing up and trying to defend something you don't recognize anymore because you were too tired to think when you wrote it, right? You are defending something you were in full control of, working in bullet time, right? As you were making it. Don't be worried. It's a waste of energy, right? You need that energy to write your stuff, to do your work, right? So just do the work and then that's it. Relax, right? That will improve the quality of the work you're doing, right? But you decide how many hours you need, right? But then just do those hours.